Hey there guys, it's Salis, and this week I have the pleasure of announcing to the YouTuberverse, Starcraft II Heart of the Swarm. I'm bad at this. Let me say before we get into the review that I know people have been complaining almost non-stop about a $60 price for an expansion pack. But what you have to remember about Blizzard is they don't release paid DLC through the game's lifespan, and what they call an expansion is what most companies would call a whole new game. Let's just for the sake of argument compare it with another AAA game with DLC. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 has over $70 of DLC, and it's a $60 game. So already StarCraft has more value. But if that doesn't convince you enough, let's look at other reasons why Heart of the Swarm is worth your time or not. While Heart of the Swarm hasn't had a massive upgrade graphically from previous campaign Wings of Liberty, the improvements that have been made are noticeable. The new units in both the campaign and the online multiplayer are distinct and very polished. You do get a good feel for the Zerg, which as a Protoss player it was nice. It was nice to be able to handle the race I've never touched in multiplayer. The planetscapes in this game are very beautiful. Despite, due to it being an RTS, the only limited view you have is an immediate overhead view. The landscapes and terrain look distinctive from region to region on any given map. The menus are not normally something I touch in a review, but since this is an RTS with between mission menus, I think it's something worth mentioning. The game's main menu features a great new animated Kerrigan, who uses psionic powers to manipulate the rooms around her. But where the in-game menus shine is the Leviathan, which is the menu between missions. There are several NPCs who you accumulate throughout the campaign, who just like in Wings of Liberty, hang out aboard your ship. And they come and go and you can interact with them in all the menus. This makes it kind of less of a menu and more of a treasure chest for lore nerds like me. Animation quality throughout is very good, from the way Kerrigan moves and how her armor pulses, and even how the new Baneling's roll is very, very smooth. But where appearance is at its peak, as with so many Blizzard games before it, is its cutscenes. And for once, it's nice to see a game where cutscenes are used correctly and not in an obnoxious way. They are fantastically modelled. Every character is very, very detailed and has clearly had a lot of work put into the world as well. But for me, the standout moments in the game's cutscenes is where the Terran ship is flying alongside the Zerg Leviathan, and you can clearly see the difference between the two ships, the mechanical Terran ship and the biological Zerg ship, and the Zerg ship absolutely dwarfs the Terran vessel, which in the Wings of Liberty campaign was made out to be very, very big. And it even launches Nidus worms directly into the hull of a prison vessel. That really did shine out for me, and I was so glad I saw it. But what good are visuals without sound? Which is good, but for a non-Zerg player might be somewhat confusing. The majority of the sound effects of this game are the insectoid grunts, growls and squeals you would expect. But it does kind of become hard to tell one growl from another, unless you are a hardened Zerg player. Other sound effects are less confusing, however. Weapons fire sounds very distinctive, and you can clearly tell the difference between the guns and launchers used against you, as well as the various different types of vehicle sounds. But I know you're only waiting for me to talk about the voice acting, and I'm not going to disappoint. Voice acting in this game is absolutely stellar, with recurring cast members pulling out the same A-game they did in the previous Starcraft II outing. Kerrigan's transition from Zerg to human is reflected in her performance very well, with her starting out more emotional and human, but after losing Jim Raynor and accepting her fate and her need to reunite the Swarm, she becomes almost as cold and emotionally empty as the Queen of Blades. But the transition is handled extremely well, and even as Swarm Kerrigan, you can still detect her humanity inside, and this humanity comes back later in the game, which I'm not going to spoil right now. There are some truly standout performances from the new characters introduced. My favourite being Dahaka, a primal Zerg who's only following the Swarm to further his own evolution. But his voice is something to behold, and the person responsible for his voice acting must either be immune to sore throats or still in recovery, because they nailed the insectoid characterization of Dahaka right down to his speech pattern. The final standout performance is Abatur, a unique Zerg construct with a single purpose, whose performance carries his knowledge and wisdom, but also his single-mindedness across perfectly, leading to some very interesting dialogue between him and Kerrigan. Well, all that sounds like a great plot for a movie, but what about gameplay? What about gameplay? I loved every second of Heart of the Swarm. Even though RTS generally only have one method of assuring victory, make lots of big things to steamroll the small things. But there is significant change made from Wings of Liberty. The hero units, for example. In this case, you get to control several hero units throughout the game, sometimes at the same time. But for the majority of missions, you control Kerrigan, as well as her swarm units. And I appreciate having the protagonist more involved in the campaign than the millions of clone pricks you birth during gameplay. And this is something I think Heart of the Swarm does way better than Wings of Liberty. However, there is a problem. The hero units are too overpowered. The Zerg heroes cannot die at all, which completely removes any idea of a fail state. Because if they die, they are reconstituted at the hatchery and their abilities are vastly more powerful than the enemy. Kerrigan's kinetic blast can destroy an armoured vehicle in one shot, and this gives a strange feeling of overconfidence, which is undermined severely in one particular mission where your hero unit is unavailable. And you need to use standard units to defend them on 3 fronts at once. And in that mission, the difficulty leaps up like a fence. However, hero units aside, the majority of units do have a distinct purpose. The only units I rarely found myself using was Queens, but that was because Kerrigan could heal everything on her own, and I took the missions in an order whereby I had decent anti-air without them. And the ability to choose the order in which you handle the missions is a feature I am glad they kept in. And with each mission unlocking different units, it gives you the opportunity to select the order in which you unlock your units, and you can get your favourites as early as possible. Obviously there is a limit to the choice, but that's handled well to prevent you from steamrolling early missions with the biggest, baddest units. There are additional missions to unlock, new evolutions for the various units which you unlock as you go through the campaign, and these change the playstyle significantly. For instance, the Swarmlings, which are multi-spawn Zerglings for very fast rushes, and the Tortusk Ultralisks, which have a unique mechanic, they reincarnate after death. And these mutations also change the design. I only realised during the last mission, all the upgrades and mutations I'd selected resulted in a full purple swarm, and that made me smile. But the mutations are more than just a palette swap. They allow you to use new tactics, like sending hunter banelings in the back of an enemy's base by jumping over a cliff, while swarming the front gate with swarmlings. And some missions don't work with the standard tactic of swarm a base and destroy it, because the objectives are suitably varied in this game. And they keep each mission fresh and interesting. The only issue I have with the gameplay is the upgrade system in this game is a lot looser than in Wings of Liberty. Instead of being locked in with your upgrades and research choices, you can only swap abilities between missions, but you can swap them as many times as you want, and you can improve your characters. Instead of having to collect research stuff, Kerrigan just levels up as you go through the game. I mean, granted, the upgrades do improve your chances, but with the lack of a lockdown system, these decisions lack consequence. I like the Wings of Liberty system, and so I decided to stick with all my upgrades and decisions even if they didn't work out. That being said, you can still do exactly what I did if you don't want the swappable options. Story spoilers are approaching. Okay, so fresh from the Wings of Liberty campaign, Kerrigan is human again. But the Terrans don't quite trust her humanity, so they test her to see how much Zerg is left in her. She shows them they can't weaponize the swarm, and Raynor helps her escape. But she gets cut off from him and is led to believe he's dead. So of course, she needs an army to get her revenge. She starts collecting Zerg to get her revenge on Mengsk for killing Jim. And this leads to a quest to reunite the entire Zerg swarm once again. And it leads to a revelation from Zeratul, you know, the Protoss prophet who reveals the future to anyone he passes by, much to the shame of his species, I'm sure. And they go to the planet where the Zerg first evolved. and they find Primal Zerg, a collective of Zerg who were not under the control of the fallen Xel'Naga Amon, who controlled the swarm using the Overmind before the birth of the Queen of Blades. This leads to her becoming a Primal herself and completely undoing everything that the Terrans had done to save her, and using her new unhindered powers to unite the swarm once again, this time under a free-willed ruler. But all is not as it seems, for a cult of Amon has started creating Protoss-Zerg hybrid soldiers for Mengsk, something which would normally be impossible without the help of a Xel'Naga. And after destroying them, they learn Amon is in fact not dead, but still very much alive. So Kerrigan leads the swarm to get revenge on Mengsk, and after rescuing Jim Raynor, they kill him, and prepare for the ultimate confrontation with Amon. The entire Zerg swarm against a god. The story is more gripping than a rubber-lined vice. I'm not going to lie, the twists and turns in the narrative lead to some excellently timed reveals and interesting character development. And it ends in a way which sets up perfectly for the Protoss expansion, which I believe is going to be called Legacy of the Void, which I am thoroughly looking forward to. Now, the controls for Heart of the Swarm are fairly intuitive. It's the standard RTS click and drag is still fully in place, but there are keyboard shortcuts to control units quickly and determine build orders, and to quickly spawn heavily used units. And these can be tricky to learn, but they're fairly easy to learn, Z for Zergling for instance. Other than that, no real innovation has been made to the controls, which is good, because it's an RTS. Controls don't need innovation for RTS. The game is pretty well optimised, running very well on my massive rig on max settings, and just as well on medium on my mid-range laptop, which I always test it on. However, I think Blizzard like their streaming system a little too much. And even though I had fully downloaded all the latest patches, it said 100%, I'm going to go with that, it still insisted on streaming some data during the loading screens, which with my poor internet connection resulted in some fairly lengthy loading times. However, I found out whatever it is streaming is irrelevant. When I disconnected from the internet, the loading times were significantly decreased, and honestly, I was more than willing to lose the achievements and social connections if it meant less loading time. Heart of the Swarm finds its replay value in the archives, which is a system which allows you to replay any mission in the game with the bigger, badder units you unlock later. But let's take a walk down Real Street for a second. The main place Heart of the Swarm gets its replay value is in the multiplayer, which, by the way, is one of the best and biggest esports out there, and for good reason. Blizzard worked diligently to improve game balance and support for tournament play, and thanks to sites like YouTube and Twitch TV, players have had much support, and almost as much support as any traditional sport. So if you are that way inclined, get your friends online and enjoy everything this game has to offer. So, in conclusion, Heart of the Swarm is not an expansion. There is too much new content, with over 25 missions. In fact, there are actually more missions in this than in Wings of Liberty. It's an entirely separate storyline, which does feed the meta story really well. And I clocked in over 15 hours of gameplay, and you will too if you're like me and you take the time to experience everything the game has to offer, such as the additional conversations, and all the extra missions, the evolution missions, all that stuff. The addition of active heroes is really good, if not a little too powerful. And the new units allow you to think outside of a whole new box. More than in Wings of Liberty, I think. You get better options. The multiplayer scene is very, very active and extremely popular, and this game will give you so much entertainment. It's probably one of the best games we will see this year. I give Starcraft II Heart of the Swarm a solid 9 out of 10. So, thank you for watching my review of Starcraft II Heart of the Swarm. Remember to hit that like button and favourite it, and if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe. Until next week, I've been Salis, this has been Heart of the Swarm, and I will see you next time.
We are unending.
Flash freeze will be here soon. The flash freeze storms are getting shorter. It will be harder to take advantage of the storms. A flash freeze storm has hit.
Speak. This world is mine. We are without limit.
Flash freeze now ending.
Slay them all.
Are under attack.
I sense your fears. We adapt.
We should wait for a flash freeze before attacking this heavily fortified location.
Bring my way. Enforce my hands. Make your peace.
The hive cluster is under attack. Forces are under attack. In a few moments, there will be a flash freeze. Flash freeze is here.
Yes. No mercy. Death awaits you. This world is mine. I am the storm.
Mutation complete. Flash freeze storm is fading. Our forces are under attack.
The spires have fallen! Retreat!
The Protoss expedition will be unable to contact Shakuras.
Now they have to deal with us.